Hey there. It's Miss G. It's Tuesday, March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you all. The sun is finally coming out. It was raining, a little snowy this morning. Um, just checking in with you all. Finally figured out how to use Google Meet. Took me a little while, but I think we've got it now, which is good. So I thought I would record a little bit of what we had been reading together last week and the weeks before from the Sisters Grimm. I brought it home with me. So I'm going to try this today and see how it goes. I'm going to put up a cover of the book and I'm going to read to you the next part of the chapter and try to record a chapter a day. So be sure to check back on our Google Classroom. Let me know if there's any issues. I'm still learning along the way, so I'm sure there's going to be a few mistakes, which is okay. It's a learning moment for me. So here we go. So we're going to pick up where we left off with the Sisters Grimm. And present. Window. Let's try this again. Okay, hopefully. Okay, so hopefully that worked. And now that I'm looking at it, I realize that I grabbed the wrong book when I was looking for an image of the cover. So bear with me for 1 second. And I will type in the title. There we go. It's a learning curve, right? Learning together as we go. Okay, let's make that a little bigger. And let's change the font. All right, here we go. So sit back, relax, get comfy. And enjoy. They weren't any around until yesterday, Mrs. Grimm said. Long ago, the ever-afters realized that giants were just too unpredictable. They caused as much destruction when they were happy as they did when they were mad, and once they planted themselves somewhere, it was impossible to move them. Imagine trying to plant seeds on your farm with a sleepy giant lying across it. When humans started moving into Fairyport Landing, everyone realized that giants were just too big to disguise. Of course, the giants didn't agree and refused to go back to their kingdom. Your great uncle Edwin and your great aunt Matilda tricked them into climbing their beanstalks, and once they were all up there, the townsfolk chopped the beanstalks down. What good would that do? Daphne asked. No beanstalk, no way into our world. Of course, there were a couple of people who didn't much care for the plan. In the old days, people would plant magic beans and climb up the beanstalks just to steal the giant's treasures. Lots of people were foolish enough to try, but only one ever survived the ordeal, Mrs. Grimm said. Jack? Daphne asked. You are correct, Liebling. Jack robbed many giants and killed quite a number of them, too. In his day, he was very rich and famous, though I hear he's working at a big and tall clothing store downtown now. I can't imagine he'd be too happy doing that. Are you going to sit here and tell us that Jack was a real person? Sabrina snapped. Was and is, my love, Mrs. Grimm replied. So let's just say all of this is true. If all the beanstalks were destroyed, how did a giant get down here? Sabrina asked, confident that she had tripped up the old woman. Ah, Liebling, that is indeed the mystery we are trying to solve. Whoever did it had to have a magic bean, and I thought we had accounted for all of them. It would help if we knew why they wanted to let a giant loose. I'll bet he was a big one, Granny Relda. Probably 1,000 feet high, Daphne exclaimed. Oh, sweetheart, he's probably no bigger than 200 feet tall, Mrs. Grimm said. Sabrina looked at her little sister in the moonlight and frowned. Daphne's eyes were as big as frisbees. Sabrina was losing her little sister to the old lunatic. For a year and a half, it had been just the two of them, and Sabrina had done everything she could to keep them together and safe. She had protected her sister from nasty Miss Smart, the horrible kids in the orphanage, and all those foster parents, and now she was unable to protect her from a crazy old lady. Just then, Elvis let out a low growl. Someone's coming, Mrs. Grimm warned as headlights flashed behind them. Everyone get down. They all huddled under the windows as a car passed by and headed toward the cabin. When it was far enough away, they lifted their heads. I don't think he saw us, Daphne said. The old woman lifted the goggles to her eyes. Well, Sabrina, we've got more evidence for your theory. That's Mayor Charming's car, Mrs. Grimm said. I didn't expect to see him here. Mr. Canis rolled his window down and sniffed the cool mountain air. Then, as if he had smelled something foul, his nose curled up. The odd thing was that Elvis, who was sitting outside of Mr. Canis's window, had the same expression. The two of them were smelling something they didn't like. Charming is knocking on the door, Mrs. Grimm reported. Mr. Canis turned in his seat. Child, open your door. The dog should get back into the car. Daphne opened her door and called for Elvis, but the Great Dane stood motionless, sniffing the air as if he was dedicating all his attention to it. They're talking, the old woman continued, still looking through her goggles. Get into the car, dog, Mr. Canis called sternly. Elvis turned to face him, but kept sniffing. Wait a minute. Charming is running to his car. Something just got him spooked, Mrs. Grimm remarked, and you won't believe who's with him. It was the perfect opportunity. The old woman was watching the house, and Mr. Canis was distracted by Elvis. Sabrina grabbed her sister's hand, opened her car door, and pulled Daphne out. What are you doing? Daphne cried. We're getting out of here. This minute, Sabrina replied, but before they could even take a step, Elvis blocked their escape with his huge body. Come on, you big flea hotel. Get out of the way, Sabrina shouted, but the dog refused to budge. Don't call him a flea hotel, Daphne scolded. He's sensitive. Elvis let out a horrible whine. It was followed by an earth-shattering thump that sent the girls tumbling to the ground. What was that? Sabrina asked, trying to stand up. Girls, get into the car, Mr. Canis urged. His face looked serious and dark. We're not going anywhere with you, Sabrina cried as she got to her feet. Lieblings, please, something is coming, Mrs. Grimm begged. Something is coming? What does that mean? Enough with the stories, okay? Sabrina yelled. You're just trying to scare us and give my sister nightmares so that maybe we'll be too frightened to leave you. It was almost as if the mini earthquake had knocked something loose inside of Sabrina, in anger and frustration at being abandoned, drifting from foster home to foster home, always hoping for some place where they could be happy, but finding that whenever they got close, it was tainted with some sort of craziness. Sabrina, we can discuss this at another time. Please get into the car, Mrs. Grimm pleaded once more. I don't want to hear another word about fairies and goblins and giants or Jack and the Beanstalk or Humpty Dumpty, Sabrina raged as Elvis let out a shrieking howl. I know the difference between reality and a fairy tale. But she had hardly finished her rant when something fell out of the sky. It was monstrous and encircled the car and lifted it off the ground. Sabrina couldn't believe what she was seeing, but it was there, right in front of her. It was a hand, a giant hand. Her eyes traveled up the arm, higher and higher, until she found a giant head and then immediately wished she hadn't. Boils as big as birthday cakes poked the giant's greasy skin. A broken nose zigzagged across his face, and one dead white eye seeped pus, while the other one was lined with the crust of sleep. Hairs as thick as tree trunks jutted out of his nose and hung over a mouthful of broken, misplaced yellow and green teeth. He wore the hides of dozens of gigantic animals, including the head of what looked like a giant bear, for a helmet. The dead bear's sharp fangs dug into his bald head, threatening to pierce his brain. His boots were made from more hides, and tangled in the laces were several unfortunate saplings. A sapling is a baby tree. The giant lifted the car up to his repugnant face and looked inside like a child inspecting a toy. With his free hand, he picked his nose. "Where is Englishman?" he bellowed. "Why does he hide from me?" Sabrina couldn't see what was going on in the car as it was nearly 200 feet off the ground. Were Mrs. Grimm and Mr. Canis even still alive? It was all so horrible that the two girls barely noticed that something had dropped from the car, landing with a clang at their feet. "You cannot hide from me, Englishman!" the giant shouted as he lifted his enormous leg and stomped down hard on the little mountain cabin, flattening it like a pancake. Pieces of timber and stone sprayed into the air, just missing the girls. Sabrina and Daphne gasped. The three thugs, Tony, Steve, and Bobby, had been inside the cabin. There was no way any of them could have escaped. Looking down at the destruction, the giant let out a sickening laugh. He stuffed the car into a greasy shirt pocket, lifted his other humongous leg, and walked away, carrying the remains of the mountain cabin in the treads of his boots. The earth shook violently, and a ripple spilled across the land as if someone had tossed a stone into a pond to see it skip. Because of his mammoth stride, the giant completely disappeared over the horizon after just a dozen steps. Only the distant rumbling of his disastrous footfalls and the angry growls of Elvis remained. The girls stood completely frozen. Competing with Sabrina's fear was another unsettling emotion: humiliation. Mrs. Grimm had been telling the truth the whole time, and Sabrina had refused to listen. Sabrina had deliberately been a jerk to the old woman, and now she might never see her again to tell her she was sorry. She moved to comfort her sister, but Daphne pulled away. The little girl rushed over to pick up whatever had fallen from the car. It was Mrs. Grimm's handbag. "She was telling the truth, and you have been a big snot since the first minute. Tell me now if you think she's crazy," Daphne said furiously. "I don't think she's crazy," her older sister said, but Daphne had already turned and was marching down the road. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to rescue our family," the little girl called back without stopping. And I will show you, since there's a picture of the giant. So that, my friends, is what the giant looks like. And you can see, hopefully, up close, some of its features. And that, my friends, is chapter 4. So we will see what happens tomorrow. Thanks for joining me.